In 2008, as the global financial crisis consumed Western economics, China's State Council authorized something audacious: a state-owned enterprise called the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China. COMAC would build a narrow-body jet to shatter the Boeing-Airbus duopoly that had controlled aviation for over 3 decades. The project was designated C919, a clean-sheet, single-aisle aircraft designed to carry 158 to 192 passengers across distances of up to 5,555 kilometers. The initial budget was set at 58 billion yuan, roughly $9.5 billion US. First flight was promised by 2014, deliveries by 2016. The aircraft would be priced at just $50 to $60 million, undercutting Boeing and Airbus by nearly half. For almost 2 decades since, the global aviation industry has accepted a simple narrative: China will eventually break the duopoly. The domestic market is simply too large. Chinese carriers need thousands of new aircraft in the next 20 years. State backing is effectively unlimited. The C919 would become the third pillar of commercial aviation. Inevitability always wins. In May 2023, COMAC finally delivered on part of that promise. The C919 entered commercial service with China Eastern Airlines, flying Shanghai to Beijing. Orders exceeded 1,200 units, allegedly. The aircraft was real. It flew passengers. The duopoly everyone assumed was finally under siege. But here's what makes no sense. By the end of 2025, COMAC had delivered roughly 37 C919s total to operators in China, not 37 in a quarter, not 37 in a year, 37 aircraft across the entire life of the program. COMAC originally targeted 75 deliveries in 2025 alone, then slashed that to 25, then managed 16. 16 planes in a year won't threaten Airbus and Boeing's backlogs of thousands of aircraft. 16 planes won't dent Boeing's 737 MAX production line. 16 planes can barely sustain scheduled service across 3 Chinese airlines. Yet, it isn't Boeing or Airbus that should concern COMAC most right now. It's 2 aircraft that almost nobody in China saw coming: the Embraer E2 series and the Airbus A220. Planes that weren't built to destroy duopolies. So, how can 2 aircraft that don't even target the same seat count quietly outmaneuver the most heavily funded aviation program in history? To understand why the C919 is struggling against unexpected competitors, we need to understand why building a competitive narrowbody is so brutally difficult, even with unlimited state funding. A commercial aircraft lives and dies by a single equation: weight versus range versus payload. Every kilogram of structural mass requires fuel to carry it. Every kilogram of fuel reduces the number of passengers you can carry. Every passenger you remove destroys the economics that make a route profitable. The trade-off is merciless. The C919 was designated primarily with aluminium alloys. Its maximum zero fuel weight sits at 64,600 kilograms. Compare that directly to the Airbus A320neo at 62,900 kilograms. That's a 1,900 kilogram penalty. Almost 2,000 kilograms sounds abstract. It isn't. Almost 2,000 kilograms is dozens of passengers worth of weight at standard airline calculations. That mass must be carried on every flight. The consequences cascade through every performance metric. The C919 standard variant, it achieves a range of just 4,075 kilometers. The A320neo, 6,300 kilometers. Even the extended range C919 variant maxes out at 5,555 kilometers. That's still nearly 1,000 kilometers short of what an A320neo achieves in its baseline configuration. In all metrics, the C919 falls short of the A320neo. The weight problem wasn't inevitable. It was engineered into the aircraft through a series of critical errors during development. Reports emerged in 2020 that COMAC's engineering teams had severely miscalculated the structural load factors of the C919's airframe. Incorrect mathematical data was reportedly sent to CFM International regarding the engine mounting requirements. The result was that engine housing and their supporting structures required heavy reinforcements at COMAC's expense, adding significant dead weight to an already overweight design. The landing gear tells a similar story. During stress testing, the original gear assemblies, manufactured using domestically produced high-strength steel, failed to withstand the aircraft's operational loads. COMAC was forced to abandon the Chinese supplier entirely and switch to imported landing gears. The gear worked, but the redesign cost time, money, and most critically, added mass. Even the thrust reversers revealed manufacturing shortfalls. The C919 uses a unique O-duct reverser system. Poor manufacturing tolerances reportedly produced faulty seals, causing air leaks that disrupt airflow and create parasitic aerodynamic drag. More drag means more fuel burn. More fuel burn means less range. Less range means fewer routes. These aren't cosmetic issues, they're fundamental engineering failures that compound across the entire flight envelope. And they explain why the first flight slipped from 2014 to May 2017, why certification took until September 2022, and why production has stalled. Here's the deeper vulnerability. Despite being marketed as a triumph of Chinese aerospace independence, the C919 depends on Western suppliers for components. 48 suppliers from the United States, 26 from Europe, just 14 from China. The CFM LEAP 1C engines are a joint venture between GE Aerospace and France's Safran. The flight control systems come from Honeywell, hydraulics from Parker Hannifin, avionics from Collins Aerospace. The C919 is, in a very real sense, a Western aircraft assembled in Shanghai. This dependency became existential in mid-2025. Amid escalating US-China trade tensions, the United States temporarily suspended export licenses for the LEAP 1C engines. COMAC's production lines went silent. For several weeks, not a single C919 could be completed. The license was eventually restored, but the damage was already done. The backlog grew. Delivery targets collapsed, and the entire industry witnessed how a single geopolitical decision could ground China's flagship aviation program overnight. COMAC is developing a domestic replacement engine, the CJ1000A, targeting certification between 2027 and 2030. But turbofan engine development is measured in decades, not years. Even optimistic timelines suggest the CJ1000A won't be production ready until the early 2030s. Until then, every C919 that rolls off the assembly line does so at the pleasure of Western governments. While COMAC was fighting to build around a dozen aircraft in a year, two competitors were quietly rewriting the economics of the narrow-body market from underneath. The Embraer E195-E2, which Embraer calls the Profit Hunter, represents perhaps the most efficient narrow-body flying today. It carries up to 146 passengers, smaller than the C919's 168-seat configuration, but its maximum zero fuel weight is just 51,850 kilograms. That's 12,750 kilograms lighter than the C919, over 10,000 kilograms. The E195-E2 achieves a range of 5,556 kilometers, just exceeding the C919's maximum range, while burning dramatically less fuel. Its list price sits around $90 million compared to the C919's of around $100 million. Less expensive to purchase, less expensive to operate, already certified by almost every major aviation authority on Earth. Embraer's commercial momentum reflects this advantage. In 2025 alone, the E195-E2 secured 119 firm orders, including 50 from Avelo Airlines in the United States, 24 from LATAM in South America, and 18 from Finnair in Europe in March 2026. These aren't letters of intent from politically motivated state enterprises. These are commercial commitments from airlines. Then there's the Airbus A220, originally developed by Bombardier as the C-Series. This aircraft nearly bankrupted Bombardier Before Airbus acquired majority control and injected it with the world's most powerful commercial aviation sales network, the A220-300 seats up to 160 passengers with an extraordinary range of 6,300 kilometers. It uses advanced composite materials and Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engines to achieve fuel efficiency that the aluminium-heavy C919 simply cannot match. At the end of March 2026, Airbus had delivered over 500 A220s to operators worldwide, including Delta Airlines and Air France. The aircraft has accumulated 959 firm orders at the end of March 2026. It is certified by the FAA, EASA, and virtually every national aviation authority that matters for international commerce. And this is where the C919's competitive position collapses entirely against both the E2 and the A220. Among the major markets, the C919 currently holds only Chinese CAAC certification. It cannot legally carry a single commercial passenger in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, or in essentially any developed aviation market on Earth. EASA certification, the minimum requirement for global credibility, is estimated to take 3 to 6 additional years from 2025. That means European approval might not arrive until 2028 at the earliest, more likely 2031. FAA certification faces even steeper obstacles given the current US-China relations. No realistic timeline has been publicly established. Without international certification, something extraordinary happens to the C919's economics. Leasing companies, which finance the vast majority of the world's commercial fleet, effectively assign the aircraft a residual value near zero outside of China. No international lessor will take the risk. No secondary market exists. An airline buying a C919 cannot resell it, cannot lease it, cannot redeploy it to a non-Chinese operator. The aircraft becomes a captive asset in a captive market. The Embraer E2 and Airbus A220 face none of these constraints. They fly everywhere. They're financed by every major lessor. They maintain residual values backed by decades of operational data from hundreds of global operators. But here's where this story takes a big unexpected turn. The most damning evidence against the C919 doesn't come from Western competitors or hostile regulators. It comes from China itself. In late 2025, two major Shanghai-based private carriers, Spring Airlines and Junyao Airlines, faced a critical fleet decision. Both airlines operate from Shanghai, the same city where COMAC assembles the C919. Both faced immense political pressure to support the national champion. Both airlines chose to ignore that pressure entirely. Spring Airlines and Junyao placed combined orders for 55 Airbus A320neo family aircraft, valued at over $8.2 billion. They ordered 0 C919s. For ultra-competitive low-cost carriers, this decision was pure mathematics. When the airlines closest to COMAC, literally headquartered in the same city, refused to buy the product, the market has delivered its verdict. The significance of the C919 struggle isn't really about production delays, and it isn't about engineering miscalculations. It's about what the Embraer E2 and Airbus A220 reveal about where the narrowbody market is actually heading. You see, Boeing and Airbus spent the last 2 decades migrating up-market. They abandoned the 100 to 140 seat segment almost entirely, killing off aircraft like the A318 or the 737-700 to focus on stretched, high-capacity variants like the A321neo and 737 MAX 10. This left an enormous gap at the lower end of the single-aisle market. COMAC designed the C919 to compete at the top of the narrowbody range, directly against the A320neo and 737 MAX 8, head-to-head against the two most refined, most efficiently produced, and most globally supported aircraft in commercial aviation history. The Embraer E2 and A220 did something fundamentally different. Regional routes, secondary city pairs, thin markets where a 190-seat aircraft flies with plenty of empty seats, but a 146-seat aircraft flies full. This is the strategic vice crushing the C919. From above, the A320neo and 737 MAX offer superior range, lower fuel burn, global certification, and decades of proven reliability. From below, the E2 and A220 offer dramatically lower acquisition costs, extraordinary fuel efficiency, and the operational flexibility to profitably serve routes. The C919 is too heavy and too thirsty to make work. The C919 occupies the worst possible competitive position, too expensive and too inefficient to beat the incumbents from above, too large and too inflexible to compete with the insurgents from below. Most competitors cannot replicate COMAC's one genuine advantage. The Chinese domestic market should account for approximately 20% of global aircraft demand over the next 2 decades. State-owned carriers and lessors have allegedly placed over 1,000 orders for the C919, orders that are effectively government mandates rather than commercial decisions. But a domestic fortress has clear limits. China's carriers have already demonstrated they'll choose efficiency over patriotism. International markets remain locked behind certification walls that won't open for years, and the C919's dependence on Western components means that the fortress itself can be besieged through export controls at any moment. Meanwhile, Embraer is marketing its E195-E2 in emerging markets across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia with E2s. Airlines have publicly expressed openness to the C919 only once certification and infrastructure mature, possibly in the 2030s. By then, Embraer and the A220 will have established entrenched positions in precisely the markets COMAC needs for its first international footholds. The state capital infusion of 54 billion yuan, roughly $6.2 billion, that COMAC received in late 2025 demonstrates Beijing's willingness to sustain the program indefinitely. But capital alone cannot solve a weight problem. Capital alone cannot accelerate engine development. Capital alone cannot force foreign regulators to certify an aircraft that hasn't demonstrated global airworthiness. The C919 doesn't replace the A320neo, it doesn't match the A320neo, and critically, it doesn't address the market segment where the E2 and A220 are thriving. COMAC built an aircraft to fight the last war, a head-on assault against the duopoly's strongest products, while the actual competitive frontier shifted to smaller, lighter, more efficient aircraft that serves the routes the giants left behind. In 2008, China's State Council authorized the C919 because there was no domestic alternative. The country depended entirely on Boeing and Airbus for every commercial aircraft in its fleet. The program was patriotic necessity, not commercial innovation. National security, not shareholder returns. The goal was self-sufficiency at any cost. 17 years later, the C919 represents something far more complicated than the triumph Beijing envisioned. Not a failure, exactly. The aircraft flies, passengers board it, national pride swells with every departure from Shanghai. But commercial aviation doesn't reward ambition, it rewards efficiency, it rewards reliability, it rewards the relentless optimization of fuel burn per seat, per kilometer, that determines whether an airline thrives or dies. Billions in state capital, decades of development, and yet 2 aircraft that weren't designed to compete with the C919 at all. A Brazilian regional jet, and a Canadian program rescued by a European giant are quietly defining the future of efficient narrowbody aviation, while COMAC struggles to deliver 1 aircraft per month. The question isn't whether the C919 can survive inside China's protected domestic market. It almost certainly will. The question is whether the rest of the narrowbody world is really paying attention to who's actually winning. Hey, before you go, the YouTube algorithm thinks you're going to like this video next, so why not check it out?